several members of Congress meeting virtually this afternoon, including one of our South Texas representatives, Vicente Gonzalez, to reintroduce a bill that only made it through the House last year, talking about the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act. Congress members say this bill is aimed to combat the threat of domestic terrorism and give our government important tools to do just that.
DTPA aims to improve the federal government's prevention, reporting, response, and investigation of domestic terrorism by authorizing offices in each of the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Congress members say those government offices will monitor, investigate, and prosecute cases of domestic terrorism and coordinate their work, as well as report to Congress twice a year on identified threats.
The bill also codifies the Domestic Terrorism Executive Committee, which would meet at least 4 times per year to coordinate with U.S. attorneys and other public safety officials to promote information sharing and ensure an effective, responsive, and organized joint effort to combat domestic terrorism.
And they say it's important to note that this is a bipartisan bill. Again, it was previously introduced and passed the House last year, but not the Senate. Congress members today adding that they stand united to pass the legislation.